What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're taking a look at the possibility of wildcarding in game week 26. Going to look at the benefits, disadvantages, how the team might actually look, and how would that team play out over the next few weeks. Now, I know more and more people have been talking about this strategy. There's already some very hardened stances in terms of this is absolutely the best way to go versus this is completely awful, avoid it at all costs. The idea of this video is just to present both sides and then you can decide. If you want to save your chips for later, that is a perfectly viable strategy to go with. So let's start off with the benefits, one of which is you can load up on double game week 27 players. So that's players from Brighton and Brentford. Now with Brighton, they've got West Ham at home in game week 26. They double in 27. They blank in game week 28. That is now confirmed. And they double in game week 29. With Brentford, because of what happened in the FA Cup last night, they play Fulham at home in 26. They've got a double in 27. They play Leicester at home in game week 28. So Leicester lost to Blackburn, which means Brentford versus Leicester is on in 28. And then they double in 29. So Brentford players now become a lot more important. And some of you might have a few players from Brighton and Brentford already, and you just want to make 1 to 2 transfers to get up to a number you're happy with. There'll be some teams out there like mine, which have 0 players from those 2 teams. And a wild card is a quick way to get those numbers up while dealing with other things at the same time. You can also cover game week 28 without free hitting. You can get about 9 to 10 players that week, depending on who you're happy to transfer out, and I'll talk about that later on. Now, obviously, that's not a full 11, but it also means you can save your free hit for later on for blank game week 32 or one of the doubles in game week 34 or 37. The other thing to consider is not just the number of players, but the quality of players as well. So for my team without a wild card, I could probably actually get to 9 to 10 players anyway for blank game week 28, but they probably wouldn't be as good as if I wild carded. So that's just, it's not the only thing that should make you decide whether to wildcard or not. It's just one of those things to take into account. How many numbers can you get, but also the quality of those players as well. You can also get 11 to 15 double game week players in game week 29, which would allow you to bench boost. Now, I know a lot of people want to wildcard into a team that has 15 double game week players so that when you bench boost, your whole bench has 2 fixtures. But with this, again, it will really come down to who you're prepared to sell, because in game week 29, neither Arsenal or Man City have a double game week. So if you want to keep players like Saka and Haaland, you can't have 15 doublers because they're all going to have just one. Those 2 teams are just going to have 1 fixture that week. You could, of course, bench boost with, say, 2 double game week players on your bench and Haaland and Saka with single game weeks. That would be fine. But it all comes down to what you're comfortable with doing, right? You could save the bench boost till later on, but obviously then you've got a bigger gap. Or of course you could just save the wildcard bench boost combo until 33, 34 later on in the season if you wanted to. You can also remove any deadwood from your team as well as minutes risk. So Darwin Nunez, for example, we'll see whether he plays against Wolves in the second game of double game week 25. That might give us an indication of whether he's going to start against Man United. But obviously in terms of actual minutes on the pitch, Jota and Firmino are starting to build up fitness, and if he's still dealing with this shoulder injury, he's not necessarily someone you can rely on going forward. And we've already seen Martinelli and Nketiah both lose minutes to Trossard as well. So again, it's not that, you know, if you've got those, 2 or 3 of those players that you have to wildcard to get rid of them. It's just another thing to consider as well as all the other kind of benefits too. So if you look at my team, for example, I've got Darwin. Maybe I need to deal with him. I've got McNeil, who, to be fair, when I brought him in, it was just because he had a double game week, right? And I needed a player that played in 25. I knew I'd have to deal with him, and that's fine. I'm happy to sell him to a Brighton player. I can definitely do that. But I've also got Darwin to consider. I've got Edison in goal, who's absolutely doing my head in. I've got no other players from Brentford or Brighton. There's a lot that I can deal with in one go. It's just a case of, do I think that is enough of a benefit to not have my wild card later on? And that is basically what I'm undecided on right now. And then it also prepares you for a possible Brighton-Newcastle double in game week 31. Now, if you go onto the transfer planner fpl.team, there's a button you can click which has the predictions for all future fixtures from James from Planet FPL, and he reckons that Brighton and Newcastle could go into game week 31. So you'd be loading up on Brighton players because they double in 27 and 29, and then you'd be able to hold them for that double in 31 as well. And you'd want Newcastle players because they play in blank game week 28, they also double in 29 and possibly have a double in 31. So they're probably the main benefits that I can see for going this week. So let's take a look at some of the disadvantages. One is you probably need to remove Liverpool players in order to make the wildcard work. Now, some of you might say that's an advantage, but for those of you that took lots of hits last week to get them in, that probably isn't going to sit very well. Now, the reason that I went for a triple up on Liverpool in 25 was, one, because of the double game week. Two, I wanted to take a punt on them being differentials. And if you look at the ownership levels of, say, Trent and Darwin, they are quite low owned. Even if the punt doesn't end up working out, that was something that I wanted to do. And then three, you've got the chance of them playing in blank game week 28. But now we know the FA Cup results, that's not going to happen. Liverpool versus Fulham will be off in 28. So suddenly Liverpool's fixtures are Man United at home, Bournemouth away, blank, a double of Chelsea away and Man City away, and then they play Arsenal at home in game week 30. So although that fixture run from 28 to 30 doesn't necessarily look great, I do think it's a disadvantage to have to remove a bunch of players you just brought in for hits before Man United at home and Bournemouth away. That doesn't sit that well for me. What I will say though, if you think the wildcard is the best thing to do for your team, you should try and ignore the fact you took hits. You can't change that now. You're only trying to get the most points going forward. But it's definitely a disadvantage for me. Obviously, you've got no wildcard to handle game weeks 33 to 38. I already mentioned that if you go to fpl.team and click on the button that has James from Planet FPL's predictions, he's put in when he thinks the fixtures will fall for double game week 34 and 37. But obviously, it's impossible to be 100% sure about that. Obviously, if that is how it falls, you can start to plan now. How easy will it be to transition from no wildcard, because you're going to use it now, to handle those fixtures later on? But obviously there could be injuries, suspensions and stuff like that, and so it might be handy to have that wildcard later. So obviously if you use it now, one disadvantage is you don't have it later, right? With game week 20, sorry, this isn't really a disadvantage for 26 specifically, in terms of saving it for later. This is just a disadvantage between using it now versus game week 27, when a lot of people were talking about that before double game week 25. And obviously you get another week's worth of info if you wait until 27, which you don't have now. And part of the issue with Brighton and Brentford, March and Estepinian have got injuries at the moment. Now, De Zerbi might say before 26 they're back and fully fit and stuff like that, but ideally you'd see them play in 26 and then decide to get them in 27. With the attackers, you could go for McAllister or Mitoma instead, but for those of you that want March, it might be better not using it this week and waiting until 27. Similarly with defenders, I wouldn't be completely against getting Dunk as my option instead, but the one I really want is Estepinian because he's so attacking. So that's possibly a disadvantage of using it this week instead of 27. And also, as we saw yesterday, there were reports that came out that kind of said that Tony has admitted kind of guilt with some of the charges. Now, it only came out from one paper that I could see, and Tony did retweet something that basically made it sound like don't listen to the media. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but if you wait until game week 27, again, you've got another week's worth of info about what might happen with him. For what it's worth, I'm still quite... not confident's the wrong word, but I'm still probably going to go for him because I think there's enough upside. And if you do wildcard and have Tony, it wouldn't be the end of the world to have to transfer him out because most of your team would look pretty good, right? Because you've just wildcarded. But that is another disadvantage of using it this week rather than just saving it for 27 instead. And also, for anyone that's thinking, I'll wildcard this week and I'll bench boost in 29, there is an international break, so the gap is quite long. Again, it wouldn't necessarily put me off, but it's just something to think about. So this is what a potential game week 26 wildcard draft could look like. Now, it's definitely not final. I'm sure there's plenty of changes that you could make, but it's a pretty good starting point. Now, we know that Brentford and Brighton both double in 27 and 29, and with Brentford, they play in blank game week 28 as well. So I've tripled up on both teams. I've got Ben Mee, Tony and Pinnock from Brentford. You could obviously go for Rico Henry instead of one of the defenders if you wanted to. If you were unsure about Tony's yellow card suspension or possibly a ban or something like that, you could go for Mboma instead, who's a bit cheaper, although to be honest there's so much money left over with this draft that doesn't really matter, but he's basically nailed on, and when Tony doesn't play he takes penalties as well, so you could consider that. Likewise with Brighton, I've got Dunk, Mitoma and McAllister on the bench. You could have Estepinian instead of Dunk, you could go for March instead of McAllister or Mitoma, but you'd really need positive injury news this week if you wanted to go for that. Now, when people were looking at game week 26 wildcard drafts before the FA Cup, a lot of them had Raya because we thought that he would blank in 28, so you could have him for 27 and 29 and just have a different goalkeeper on the bench that played in 28, but you don't necessarily need to do that now, and it kind of comes down to a domino effect. So with the team that I've put together, I've got Kepa and Ben Mee. You could absolutely have Raya and a Chelsea defender instead if you wanted to. I'm just a little bit worried about their minutes and the fact that Thiago Silva looks like he's probably going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks. The one that I'd really want is Reece James, and I would absolutely prefer Reece James and Raya if you told me that James was going to play every single game, but I just don't know if that's going to be the case. I guess there is a chance that Chelsea get knocked out of the Champions League soon. They're not in the FA Cup, and obviously the League Cup's finished. So if that happened, then all they've got is Premier League to worry about, and Reece James' minutes would go up. So that is definitely a change I would think about. I think with goalkeepers in general, Kepa, Raya and Pope all play in game week 28. So part of me thinks, is there a better goalkeeper to go with that doesn't play in 28 that can give you advantages elsewhere? That is definitely something to think about. You shouldn't, go out of your way to not have one of those goalkeepers just because they both play in 28. But I just wonder if there's a better way around of doing it. So that's something to consider over the next few weeks. The reason that I've got Pope in there, even though he's quite expensive, is because of that possible double in game week 31 as well for Newcastle and Brighton. Elsewhere, I've still got triple Arsenal. One of the reasons why I was quite high on going for Wildcard 26. I've kind of come down a little bit this morning. Part of the reason is I've already got Gabriel, Odegaard and Saka, who I would consider the best 3 from Arsenal. And again, just because you've got Nketiah or Martinelli doesn't mean that's the reason you should wildcard. But loads of small reasons can be, the deciding factor in ultimately going for it. But if I wildcarded, I would keep those 3 Arsenal. And so it doesn't feel quite right to necessarily go with it. But the reason they're in there, they've got Bournemouth at home, then Fulham away in 27, and they also play in blank game week 28, so they're quite handy. And because there's so much money in the bank, you can always swap them in game week 29 for the double if you wanted to. I've got Haaland for now. He is one of the players you could consider selling in game week 28. We'll come on to that in a minute because I know most people won't be interested in that. I think you've got to keep Rashford because he's such good value. He could absolutely get goals against Liverpool away, Southampton at home, and he has a pretty good double in 29 as well. And then Watkins, as we spoke about yesterday, he's just got good fixtures all the way through. He's absolutely nailed. He plays in the blank 28 against Bournemouth at home, also has a double in 29. He just looks like an all-round good pick. So I've still got Trippier. He's only sat 3rd on the bench because the first 11 looks so good and so do the bench options, but obviously most of the time he would be played. So that's a rough draft, but there's definitely some changes you could make to that if you wanted to. So I just want to show you how this team works out over the next few weeks, where you might want to make transfers to get more players for blank game week 28 and double game week 29, and also where there might be potential struggles later on as well. So I'm working this out on a transfer planner which you can access at fpl.team. Make sure to check it out. It's completely free, excellent website. And one of the things that I would do is scroll down and click this button just above the fixtures that says set projected fixtures from Planet FPL. So Planet FPL is a podcast. Make sure you check them out. James is one of the best for trying to predict blank and double game weeks. So when you click this button, it basically puts in where he thinks the doubles will be for game weeks 34 and game week 37, and also this double I spoke about for Brighton and Newcastle in 31. So then you can see how the team looks later on in the season. Are there going to be major issues you run into, and do you ideally just need to save your wildcard for later instead? So make sure to do that. You can also click wildcard to stop the hits. Now there is 6.7 million in the bank for this draft because there's no Kane, Salah, Son or De Bruyne or anyone like that. So you've got plenty of money to get in big hitters later on. And obviously this is the draft for 26. Now in game week 27, you would probably just roll the transfer. You would have to play all your Brighton and Brentford players. So straight away, you kind of run into a slight issue where you've got to bench Gabriel and Trippier, but it is what it is. You've got 3 double game week defenders, McAllister, Matoma and Tony, and obviously you can choose who to captain. I'm not going to switch the captaincy armband as we go through. We can decide that as we get to the weeks. Now in game week 28, if I just put on all the players that are playing first of all, you've got Pope or Kepa in goal. I'd probably go for Kepa with a slightly better fixture. You've got 4 defenders, so that's 5. Your 2 Arsenal attackers is 7, and then 8 and 9 for Tony and Watkins. Now one move you could make is to remove Haaland, which, don't get me wrong, I know everybody hates that idea right now, and I'm not saying I would definitely do it, but it would add a 10th player. I'm just going to count again, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, yeah, a 10th player for game week 28, bearing in mind that Haaland doesn't have a double in 29, and the plan would definitely be to buy him back. So you don't have to do this, but it's just an option. And I'm just going to put João Felix in now, because he plays in 28, he doubles in 29. You could go for Iheanacho from Leicester if you were sure about his minutes, but I'm always just a little bit worried there. So you'd put João Felix in, you've not used your free hit, and you've got 10 players for game week 28, and you also have 10.9 million in the bank, which is just absolutely ridiculous. In game week 29, it's obviously a double game week, so you put all your doublers. In fact, before I put all the doublers on the bench, one of the moves you would make this week is probably Odegaard to Fernandes to get that double up on Man United. You'd put all your other players in, so we'll just bench Gabriel, we'll bench Saka as well. So as it stands, you've got one transfer spare and 8.1 million in the bank for game week 29. All of your 11 double. 2 of your players on the bench double as well. And you could even choose to remove Saka and Gabriel if you wanted to. Now, I'm just going to put in maybe Luke Shaw as an extra Man United player. And instead of Saka, I'll go for Maddison. Let's just assume he's fit. Then you've got your 15 double game weekers for just a 4-point hit. And you've still got enough money to bring Haaland back the week after. Now, I wouldn't get too stuck on the Haaland situation, because you can just not sell him, have one less player in 28, and then still have him in 29. So don't worry about that too much. I'm just going through how it could work out. So that's your game week 29. You would obviously bench boost that as well. And then you're just forward into playing out the rest of the game weeks. Now for this week, you'd want to bring Haaland back. And if Tony isn't banned yet, you would just get him back for João Felix. There he is, back for Southampton. You would captain him then. And I'm not going to go through putting in all the players every single week, but you could obviously bring Maddison in for one of the Brighton boys, you could bring Luke Shaw in for one of the Brentford players, etc. In game week 31, if the double for Newcastle and Brighton happens, you're already pretty set for that in terms of having Nick Pope in goal and Trippier. You could decide to add a third Newcastle at this point. You could go for an attacker, you know, kind of Wilson or Almiron or someone like that. You could add a third defender if you wanted to, but you'd already be pretty well set up. Now, I don't think it's something to necessarily massively panic about, because ultimately the double for Brighton would be Newcastle away and Chelsea away. But if you can carry them all the way from 26 right up until then, there's no reason that you wouldn't just play them. Game week 32 would probably be a blank. So if you've saved your free hit, this is the week that you would probably need to use it instead of saving it for the double. And then you're getting into game week 33, game week 34, etc. Now with the 34 doubles, the way that James has predicted it, one of them is Brighton. Well, now you've got Brighton for double game week 27, 29, 31 and 34, and just hope they don't get injured. Fulham, but it's Man City at home and Liverpool away, so there's maybe not a massive struggle to get them in for that. Liverpool is definitely one to consider. Spurs at home, Fulham at home. I would probably want to find a way to get Salah in, maybe Trent as well. Man United, Villa at home, Brighton away, but you've already put in Shaw, Fernandes and Rashford for their double in 29, so that's not a big concern. And also Man City, Fulham away and West Ham at home. Now, I would definitely want more Man City players for that. So suddenly I'm saying you've got to get more Man City players in and Liverpool players. How are you going to do that with all your transfers the previous few weeks? Now, I'm not going to go through exact transfer plans all the way through, because it's absolutely pointless. There could be injuries and stuff like that. But that's the kind of things to think about. Like, I would be thinking maybe in game week 31, maybe that's the time to bring Salah back, for example. So this kind of plays out kind of nice in terms of it feels like you could potentially get to a decent game week 34 team without a wild card, but that's hoping that everything goes perfectly, which it absolutely might not. And by the time we get to this great double of West Ham at home, Fulham away, if Foden's first choice, which he might be, he's playing really well again at the moment, and there's a defender that's absolutely nailed on, you're going to want those Man City players. So that's the thing to consider. Ultimately, things look very good for 26, 27, 28 and 29. It's just whether or not selling Haaland works out, and then also how to get up to a few more Liverpool and Man City players in 34 and beyond. So I don't want to go any further, because you can just look at that yourself, but make sure to check out a transfer planner like this when you're going through different scenarios, whether that's wildcard in 29, wildcard in 33, free hit 27, free hit 28. There's loads of different ways you can play the chips, but that is how a game week 26 wildcard would kind of work out. So if you enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like. like, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Let me know down below, are you more or less likely to go for Game Week 26 wildcard at this point? I'm still not sure, but I do think that looks pretty good, so I am tempted. I just don't really want to sell Salah and Trent before Bournemouth away, and that is one of the things that is definitely playing on my mind. But I'll leave that video there. In terms of more chip strategy stuff, I'll talk about that tomorrow, because I want to wait until the FA Cup results are completely final, because there's more matches tonight and the draw has been made. So that's what we'll talk about tomorrow. Team selection and everything to come up as well. Otherwise, I'll catch you again tomorrow.